There's a sentiment online that the fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm are a collection of messed up nightmare fuel that is so bloody and so spooky that Disney kiddified these tales to make them palatable for the children. In the past, I used to bow my head to images like this uncritically, but since then, I've read through every fairy tale that the Grimms put together twice, and I don't really agree with it anymore. A misconception that modern people have is that the Brothers Grimm wrote all of their tales. That's not exactly right. While it is true that there is an authorial literary quality added to their fairy tales, often because of Wilhelm Grimm, they didn't invent Sleeping Beauty. According to Joseph Campbell, it was a tale supplied by an old nurse named Marie, who used to take care of Dorchen Wilde, who herself supplied several fairy tales to the Grimm's collection, such as Hansel and Gretel, The Three Little Men in the Wood, and The Six Swans. Now, practically everyone knows about Hansel and Gretel, but what the heck is The Three Little Men in the Wood? That, my good sir, is one fairy tale out of the 200 present in this collection. While it might be easy to watch a YouTube video that picks apart a fairy tale using creepy music and visuals, it's a whole nother experience to actually read through them in print. One of the things I realized as I read through this collection is that these fairy tales are quite entertaining. The first tale in this collection is The Frog Prince or Iron Henry, a story where a princess learns to keep her promise to a frog that found her golden ball. Right as it seemed the frog was going to be unalive, it becomes a handsome prince that marries her and later breaks open the bars that held Henry's aching heart. The next tale is a brief animal story where a deceiving cat and a trusting mouse become partners, with the latter becoming lunch for the former. The next tale is a heart-pounding morality tale involving the Blessed Virgin, heaven, sin, and the act of repentance against a girl's pride that threatens to consume her in fire. The next tale is the story of a youth who went forth to learn what fear was. Despite being called stupid by the narrator itself, this quote-unquote blockhead is a mad lad. In his quest to learn how to shudder, this guy accepts a life-threatening challenge to sleep in a haunted castle for 3 nights, with dangers ranging from 2 great black cats to a tall old man who has access to a smith's axe. Instead of unaliving him, the cats ask the guy if he wants to play a game of cards. He accepts, but later kills him after not feeling like it. He plays a game of bowling against a group of dead men and even later meets his deceased cousin. After a short time, the dead man became warm too and began to move. Then said the youth, "See, little cousin, have I not warmed you?" The dead man, however, got up and cried, "Now will I strangle you." "What," said he, "is this the way you thank me? You shall at once go into your coffin again." And he took him up, threw him into it, and shut the lid. Even after going through the trial, he's still unhappy that he didn't learn how to shudder. And this isn't even the complete end of the story. This, along with others, is among the many kinds of tales you'll see in the Grimm's fairy tale corpus. In less pages than it takes to go through the Lord of the Rings, you'll encounter a ship carrying wild beasts, strange animals, and vessels made up of 5 tons of gold, a star that gives a girl a chicken drumstick to enter a glass mountain, a little table that can spread out food and drink by itself, and so much more. As I read through pages and pages of these tales, I found myself in awe when I saw our murdered brother come back to life as a singing bird. I was amazed at the descriptions of a girl wearing a dress as golden as the sun, silver as the moon, and one as bright as the stars. And I stood amused at the little tales of things going haywire over a lice burning herself, and a tale where a bowl of porridge goes out of control because the mother forgot the fairy tale equivalent of a password. As one can tell, there's a vast variety of adventures and amusements to be had here. Within the umbrella term of fairy tale, which is likely a misnomer as I don't recall many fairies present at all, the Grimms collect tales of heroes, fables, anecdotes, and likely more that I've neglected to mention. Speaking of which, there's a pretty big elephant in the room that I think most of you are wondering about. What about the gruesome stuff? I'm not gonna lie, there are gruesome elements present in the tales. In the Grimm's version of Rapunzel, the prince has his eyes pierced by thorns, the story of the robber bridegroom has a scene of a girl being murdered and chopped into pieces, and the ending of Little Snow White has the evil stepmother wear red-hot iron slippers and dance until she drops down dead. These elements are dark and disturbing, but as a person who has gone on to read authors such as Apollodorus, Euripides, and more, I've come to realize that violent content such as murder, cannibalism, and the like are not uncommon in older storytelling. The Diogeny of Hesiod has Kronos castrating his fodder and swallowing down his children. The Iliad of Homer is filled to the brim with death scenes. Chapter 19 of the biblical book of Judges has a passage of a concubine being assaulted and having her body cut into 12 pieces. And the Diogeny of Danu, a myth in a collection that includes the Epic of Gilgamesh, has instances of incest, patricide, and matricide. Encounters with violence and wickedness mixed in with elements of goodness, weirdness, enchantment, and our consolation are likely would have been part of the storytelling tradition for most of human history, especially in fairy tales which are not meant to be realistic to modern sensibilities. You can't escape these things once you head outside the comfort zone of mainstream entertainment. I could especially understand Gen Z making these complaints if we largely grew up only taking in light and soft material like Beatrix Potter, Bramley Hedge, and Monet. However, any Zoomer with even a partially functioning memory would know that we do not have a great claim to a moral high ground when it comes to dark and disturbing aspects in the stuff we consumed. Really, I think the main reason why people find the Grimm's fairy tales so disturbing is because they haven't read them for themselves and let other YouTubers read these tales for them and show them that, believe it or not every fairy tale is like a Disney movie. Have you even seen an old Disney movie of your childhood?
Snow White is a biblical allegory featuring Lucifer's transformation from a beautiful angel to Satan, the fall and death of man, and the eventual salvation from God's love, with themes of jealousy and the dangers of innocence throughout. Pinocchio is the fable of a blank slate cast into an immoral world where he has to try and develop a moral code that will be capable of guiding him through this world. Fantasia is an experimental art film with multiple stories that have a wide variety of themes ranging from the dangers of power, the inherent violence of evolution, and the war between good and evil. Finally, Bambi is a coming-of-age epic depicting a young child's growth as he learns everything from concepts, words, the nature of the seasons, love, danger, austerity, wonder, fear, tragedy, courage, and responsibility.
It's interesting that it's always adults that talk about the weird stuff in the Brothers Grimm, but from the videos I've seen, I often don't hear about what the kids think. And from what I've heard and watched, it seems we underestimate how much kids can handle stuff like fairy tales.
Over and over, I get asked the question, well, what about the weird parts of fairy tales? Because yes, there are some weird stuff in fairy tales. I have never, ever run across a kid who finds any of it weird. It's the parents. And I've had this experience where I'm reading a fairy tale out loud to my children, and I'm thinking, this is nuts. What is going on? And this could not be weirder. And I look at my children, they're not even batting an eye, right? That's like, it's not weird to them at all. Because everything is weird to a kid, right? The fact that the grass is green and the sun rises and sets, like the whole world is just full of wonder and mystery and puzzlement and, in a sense, enchantment. I think that's part of the reason why they want to hear these stories over and over. Is that it's not the plot and the suspense that's driving the enjoyment of the story. There's something else going on there, namely that there's just a deep satisfaction going on in their soul.
Now, I'm not saying that we should just let kids take in whatever without any discretion. As a guy who has taken university courses related to animation, I'm a firm believer that there is a world of difference between reading a passage of Rumpelstiltskin splitting himself in two and watching a woman being murdered with the addition of visuals and sound that can leave a very strong imprint upon a child's mind. To bring it back to the Grimm's fairy tales, once I started reading story after story, page after page, I soon got used to the weird elements and just learned to go with the flow. Like, You're not going to convince me that The Two Brothers isn't a proto-Pokemon epic where two brothers get 6 pairs of animals and head off to separate paths. You will not make me unamazed at the descriptions of a female emperor's palace that was made possible by a fish. And you will not convince me that a huntsman shooting an evil dragon in the heart is not cool. To me, the interesting things about the Grimm's fairy tales isn't just the blood or chopped limbs, it's the patterns and rhythms present in the stories. As you journey on, you'll notice that characters tend to do actions in threes, you'll notice the youngest sibling receiving the best gifts, and you'll notice ordinary folk getting access to crazy good items. You'll see maidens being forgotten by their beloveds and having to remind them again, and you'll encounter animals and inanimate objects up to wild stuff. To me, this is what I love about the Grimm's fairy tales. The stories contained since publishing are so old, yet feel alive. There's even bits of intertextuality. There's a story about a tailor who enters heaven, but is soon sent to what's essentially purgatory, and that story is referenced by another character in another story hundreds of pages later. The story of a youth who went forth to learn what fear was also appears in the grave mound. It's like a living, breathing body of text. However, I'll note that you will encounter at least a few tales that contain hints of anti-Semitism. But out of 3 cited stories in this Wikipedia article, one story explicitly condemns the killing of the Jew, another has the protagonist that's against the Jew throw his newfound money at frogs because he thought they were saying he had 8 tailors instead of 7. But when it comes to the Jew among thorns, yeah, I'm not really going to defend that one. What I will defend, however, is the literary hand of Wilhelm Grimm. In my edition of the complete Grimm's fairy tales, the front cover and a part of the introduction imply that these tales come presented just as the brothers intended, taking the stories straight out of the oral storytellers and putting them down on paper, with just a layer of English translation. That's not the case. The book I have is a translation of the 7th edition of the Grimm's fairy tales, and even then, as Father G. Ronald Murphy notes, they often rework the material extensively for effect. I'm not gonna lie, that knowledge bummed me out, especially since the Grimms themselves seem to play up this raw oral transmission angle in a preface by saying that Dorothea Weyman, a literate woman of French stock who was thoroughly middle class, was a German peasant who told from her memory ancient tales from the old tradition. But I got over it, as I learned that at least some of these tales held something cool. As I mentioned before, there's a story in which a murdered brother comes back to life as a bird. That is from the story The Juniper Tree. As Ruth B. Boddigheimer notes, in The Juniper Tree, an elaborate, intricate, and beautiful symbol links classical allusions to immortality with Germanic and biblical ones, and narrates the first stage of the murdered boy's return to life. Then the juniper tree began to stir itself, and the branches parted asunder and moved together again, just as if someone were rejoicing and clapping his hands. Germanic, the tree Yggdrasil. At the same time, a mist seemed to arise from the tree, and in the center of this mist, it burned like a fire, and a beautiful bird flew out of the fire singing magnificently. Classical, the phoenix, and he flew high up in the air. And when he was gone, the juniper tree was just as it had been before, and the handkerchief with the bones was no longer there. Biblical resurrection. Let's move to the tale of Little Red Riding Hood. To the eyes of the Brothers Grimm, it's very likely the wolf wasn't merely an antagonist, but a living symbol of Fenrir, the great wolf of German mythology whose jaw stretched from one end of the cosmos to the other. The wolf also has links to Christianity, as the wolf is one of the devil's forms in the Iliad, a 9th century Old Saxon recount of the life of Jesus. This link between the wolf and the devil is less of a reach when one sees that the description of Red Riding Hood opening her eyes after being persuaded by the wolf to look beyond the path to her grandmother's house mirrors the account of the fall, as Adam and Eve have their eyes opened after being persuaded by the devil to disobey God's commandment. The huntsman in the Grimm's version is analogous to the Christian savior, rescuing Red Riding Hood and her grandmother from the wolf in a manner resembling Jesus, rescuing the young and the old from the death that comes through succumbing to temptation, sin. Finally, the replacement of the two within the wolf's belly with stones resembles the Greek myth of Rhea, giving her husband Kronos a stone to swallow down instead of their sixth child Zeus. In Sleeping Beauty, the futile attempt of the king to prevent his daughter's finger being pricked by a spindle echoes the futile attempt by Oedipus's father to prevent the murderous destiny forewarned to him. The thorn hedge growing around his sleeping castle that will open up only after 100 years have passed resembles the Germanic tree Yggdrasil that will open itself up only once the right time has come. Finally, the coming of the right king's son to the thorns is a synthesis of Jesus going to the crown of thorns, the Germanic singer going to the flames, and Theseus going to the Minotaur's labyrinth. From what I've read of the owl, the raven, and the dove, at least 5 of their most iconic tales are masterclasses in weaving in biblical, Greek, and Norse sources to create rich Christian texts that don't back away in approaching pagan symbols and stories. Now, one might wonder why the Grimm brothers, especially Wilhelm, would make the effort to do all of this. Well, one should look at the first paragraph in the first chapter of The Owl, the Raven, and the Dove. The brothers Grimm thought of fairy tales as remnants of ancient faith expressed in poetry. The brothers, especially Wilhelm, who continually revised the tales over a period of 40 years, found those untouched grains of wheat still surviving on the margins of religious and poetic consciousness and traditional figures of speech, common superstitions, and, above all, in old stories. Wilhelm was a gleaner, he believed, of remnants of ancestral German religious faith surviving on the margins of culture in popular poetic tales. The gleaner, however, was also a kneader and blender of other ancient stories embodying religious faith. He collected and re-expressed the religious faith found in the poetic tales primarily of 3 ancient traditions: classical Greco-Roman, Norse Germanic, and biblical. In all 3, he was at home as a fluent reader, student, and storyteller, and, in one of them, Christianity, was a devout believer. They didn't take tales from Perrault and Basileia and just slap 19th century Christianity onto them. I believe that, in the eyes of Wilhelm, the brothers didn't defang the tales by weaving in biblical and mythological elements together, but made them more of what they were. To me, the brothers Grimm didn't sanitize the fairy tales, but sanctified them. Now, you may not share my views on this matter, but at the very least, if I made you think about the Grimm's fairy tales beyond, oh man, they're darker than Disney films, then this video has basically done its primary job. To me, the Grimm's fairy tales represent a treasure trove of stories that help form the basis of the modern Western imagination. I had a lot of fun going through it, and it hurts when I see many of these stories being either ignored or relegated to a punchline. If there's one thing I hope you can take from this video, then I hope you can learn to treat these tales with respect. Not completely uncritical praise, of course, but at least with respect. To help finish off this video, I would like to quote something by C.S. Lewis. When I was 10, I read fairy tales in secret and would have been ashamed if I had been found doing so. Now that I am 50, I read them openly. When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up. Now, I am 24 as I write this and in the process where I create and share a video about fairy tales. What should I do with this 20-plus year head start? Mr. Lewis spent the later part of his journey in fiction with the Chronicles of Narnia, a series whose usage of Greco-Roman myth reminds me a bit of the Grimms. Should I write my own fairy tales? Would you guys even really care to read them? Could I catch a mouse and make a big fur cap out of it? Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, then please like, comment, subscribe, and give me money.